One of the founding members of the rock group Kiss has died. He was 74.
The news sent a chill through the world of rock. When Criss, the legendary drummer of Kiss, finally spoke about his last conversation with guitarist Ace Frehley, fans could hardly believe what they heard. Two men who once stood side by side under the blinding lights of fame, who defined an era of theatrical rock and rebellion, shared one final exchange that was far more emotional than anyone expected. It wasn't about fame, or music, or money. It was about regret, brotherhood, and the cost of time. The relationship between Criss and Frehley had always been complicated. They were kindred spirits, both rebellious, both raw, both driven by the chaos of rock and roll. But the same fire that made them legends also tore them apart. Their years together in Kiss were filled with hits, headlines, and heartbreak. So when Criss sat down years later to talk about Ace Frehley's final words to him, his voice cracked. He wasn't the confident Catman from the 1970s anymore. He was a man looking back on a brother he had lost long before death ever came. What he shared that day revealed not only the emotional depth of their friendship, but also the haunting loneliness that comes when the music fades and fame moves on. When Criss talks about the early days of Kiss, his tone shifts between laughter and sorrow. "We were kids," he once said. "We didn't know what we were doing. We just wanted to make noise." That noise would eventually shape an entire generation. And at the center of that wild storm were two kindred souls. Criss, the fiery drummer with a street-tough heart, and Ace Frehley, the mysterious guitarist whose riffs could set the stage on fire. Their friendship began long before fame consumed them. Peter remembered their first meeting vividly. Ace walked in with this weird silver outfit and the craziest shoes I'd ever seen. I thought, this guy's out of his mind. But when he plugged in that guitar, man, he was magic. From that moment, they clicked. On stage, they spoke a language no one else understood, pure rock energy. Off stage, they shared jokes, late-night talks, and dreams of escaping the ordinary. But as the fame of Kiss skyrocketed, their unity began to crack. The band's success brought more than just applause. It brought control, ego, and endless pressure. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley were focused on business. Peter and Ace cared about the soul of the music. It stopped being a band, Peter said years later. It became a brand. With every tour, the tension grew. The spotlight that had once bonded them began to blind them. The long nights of laughter were replaced with silence, and the brotherhood they once cherished was slowly swallowed by fame and exhaustion. Ace's struggles with addiction deepened, and Peter's own frustrations pushed him to the edge. By the late 70s, both men had walked away from Kiss, each believing the other would understand, but time didn't heal their wounds. Years passed with barely a word between them. Fans kept asking if they would ever reunite, and both would smile and deflect, hiding the pain that never really went away. Peter once admitted, "You think you've got forever to make things right. But you don't. One day you wake up and that forever's gone." In the early 2000s, the two began to speak again, quietly, privately, away from cameras. They shared old memories, laughed about their wild youth, and even joked about how they'd managed to survive it all. But beneath the laughter, something lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement that time had taken too much from them. Then, during one of those rare calls, Ace said something that made Peter go silent. "You know, Cat," Ace said softly, using Peter's old nickname, "we were the real deal, man. We didn't fake it. We lived it. And maybe that's why it hurt so much when it all fell apart." Peter didn't know what to say. For decades, he had carried resentment, sadness, and a deep longing for closure. But hearing those words cracked something open inside him. That conversation would turn out to be one of their last. When Ace's health began to fail, Peter reached out again. He sounded tired, Peter recalled, but he still had that same spark in his voice. He said he was proud of what we did, proud of the music, and that he missed those days when it was just about the fun. Peter said he could hear a faint laugh at the end of the line before the call ended. That laugh, the same one that used to echo through backstage halls and studio walls, stayed in his mind. He didn't know it then, but those were among the last words Ace Frehley would ever say to him. It was the end of an era, Not just for Kiss, but for a friendship that had helped define rock itself. Peter often says that the silence that followed was louder than any drum he ever played. When Peter Criss finally revealed the details of that last phone call with Ace Frehley, his voice carried the kind of tremor that only grief can create. It wasn't a long conversation, just a few minutes, but it held a lifetime of emotion. For two men who had shared stages, battles, and broken dreams, that final exchange was their quiet goodbye to decades of music and brotherhood. Peter said he had been thinking about calling Ace for weeks. He'd heard rumors about Ace's declining health, and something inside him wouldn't let it go. It was one of those gut feelings, he explained. I just knew I had to hear his voice again. When Ace finally picked up, his tone was faint but familiar. "Hey, Catman," Ace said with a soft laugh. "You still keeping the beat?" That one line brought a smile to Peter's face and a tear to his eye. They talked about everything and nothing. About how much music had changed, how the industry had lost its soul, and how time seemed to move faster than ever. But somewhere in between the jokes and memories, the tone shifted. Ace paused for a long moment, then said something that stopped Peter cold. "You know, Pete," he said quietly, "we spent half our lives chasing the wrong things. We thought it was about being legends, but it was never that. It was about the music, about us, about the bond we had. I miss that. I miss you." Peter didn't know how to respond. For years, both men had carried pride and pain like heavy armor. Hearing Ace speak from the heart stripped that armor away. "I told him I missed him too," Peter recalled softly. "And I meant it more than anything." Then came the words that would stay with Peter forever. Ace's final message to his oldest friend. "Don't let them forget who we really were," he whispered. "The world saw the makeup, the shows, the explosions, but you and me, we were the heartbeat. Promise me you'll keep that alive." Peter's throat tightened. "I told him I would," he said. And then he said, "Good, because I'm tired, man. Really tired." There was a brief silence. Peter said he could hear the faint hum of Ace's breath on the other end. Then Ace added softly, "See you on the other side, Cat." That was it. The line went quiet. Peter hung up, unaware that those words, those gentle, haunting words, would be the last he'd ever hear from Ace Frehley. When the news came that Ace had passed, Peter said the world seemed to freeze. "You think you're prepared for something like that," he said, "but you're not. No matter how many years go by, you're never ready to lose someone who shared your soul." At the memorial, surrounded by old bandmates and lifelong fans, Peter sat quietly in the corner. He didn't give a speech or play a song. He simply looked at the stage, the same kind of stage they had conquered together, and whispered, "We did it, brother. We really did." Afterward, when fans asked what Ace's final words were, Peter hesitated for a long time before finally sharing them. "He told me to keep the heartbeat alive," Peter said, his voice trembling. "And that's what I'm trying to do every day since." That moment reshaped how fans saw both men, not just as rock icons, but as two human beings bound by a friendship that fame couldn't destroy. It wasn't about guitars or drum solos anymore. It was about legacy, forgiveness, and the realization that sometimes the truest love between friends is found not in the noise, but in the silence that follows. After Ace Frehley's passing, Peter Criss found himself surrounded by memories, old tour posters, gold records, and the sound of distant laughter echoing through time. The man who once pounded his drums like thunder now sat in quiet reflection, wondering how something so loud, so powerful, could end in silence. "It's strange," Peter said in one interview. "You spend half your life making noise, and the other half trying to understand it." For Peter, Ace wasn't just a bandmate. He was family. They had lived through chaos together, from their first smoky rehearsals in New York to sold-out arenas packed with thousands of screaming fans. "We were unstoppable," Peter once said. "Every night was fire and madness." But underneath all that, there was love, a real brotherly love. Yet like most families touched by fame, the cracks came fast. The drugs, the pressure, the money, they all chipped away at that bond until only fragments remained. Still, in the years that followed, Peter never spoke badly of Ace. While others in the band gave interviews filled with tension and resentment, Peter always defended his old friend. "People don't understand what Ace brought to Kiss," he said. "That sound, that swagger, that energy, it came from him. He was the spirit of rock and roll." When the world learned about Ace's final days, messages poured in from every corner of the globe. Fans shared stories, old footage, and words of tribute. Peter saw the outpouring of love and couldn't hold back his emotions. "He didn't realize how much people loved him," Peter whispered. He thought the world had moved on, but it never did. Not from Ace. In the weeks after the funeral, Peter struggled to adjust. He would sit in his home studio, surrounded by his drums, and feel the emptiness settle in. One night, he said, he found an old cassette tape labeled Ace 1976 Jam. When he pressed play, he heard the two of them laughing, improvising a blues riff between takes. The sound of Ace's guitar filled the room, alive and full of joy. Peter broke down. "I just sat there and cried," he admitted. It was like he was right there again. That recording became his treasure, a reminder of a friendship that time and fame could never erase. "I play it every now and then," Peter said. "Not to feel sad, but to feel grateful, because not everyone gets to share that kind of connection. Ace and I, we had something special, even when the world didn't see it." As years went by, Peter started speaking more openly about Ace's last words. Fans found comfort in hearing him talk about the man behind the legend, the real Ace Frehley. "He was funny, unpredictable, and full of life," Peter smiled. "But he was also gentle, deeper than people thought. He had a big heart, and I think that's what made his music so alive." Peter later admitted that Ace's final message, "Keep the heartbeat alive," became a kind of mission for him. "That line keeps me going," he said. "Every time I touch those drums, I think of him. I play for both of us now." Even today, when Peter makes public appearances, fans often shout Ace's name from the crowd. Instead of ignoring it, he nods, smiles, and taps his chest, a small, silent tribute to the man who once shared his stage and his soul. "We were brothers," Peter said. "And brothers never really say goodbye. They just wait for the next song." In the end, Peter's story isn't just about loss. It's about endurance. About two men who lived hard, loved deeply, and left behind a sound that will echo through generations. The world may remember Kiss for the flames and the face paint, but Peter Criss remembers Ace Frehley for something far greater, the friendship that outlasted fame. Years after Ace Frehley's passing, Peter Criss still feels his presence every time he walks into a studio or hears a familiar guitar riff. The noise of the crowd may be gone, but the echo of their friendship still lingers, soft, steady, and eternal. "There are moments," Peter confessed in a quiet interview, "when I close my eyes and I can still hear him laughing. That sound never leaves you." Peter has lived long enough to see his generation fade one by one. Many of his peers are gone, their legacies preserved only through records and memories. But Ace, to Peter, wasn't just another name in rock history. He was a symbol of everything raw and real about the music they created. Ace didn't care about being perfect, Peter said with a half-smile. He cared about being honest. Every note he played had soul. That's what made him special. In the years following Ace's death, Peter became more reflective, speaking less about fame and more about the price it demanded. He talked about how the industry often chewed up the very artists who gave it life. "We gave everything to that stage," he said. "Our health, our peace, our time. And when it's all over, you realize the only thing that really mattered was the people you shared it with." He keeps a framed photo of himself and Ace on his piano. The picture, taken backstage in 1975, shows the two men laughing with their arms around each other, sweaty, exhausted, but alive in every sense of the word. "That was us at our best," Peter said softly. "No fame, no fighting, just two guys doing what they loved." Fans often ask if Peter would ever consider returning to the stage. His answer is always the same. Maybe one more time. For him. He said that if he ever performs again, it won't be for the money or the crowd, it'll be for Ace. "I'd play one last song. Look up and say, 'This one's for you, brother.'" Even now, the two are forever linked in the minds of fans. Online forums, tribute pages, and documentaries continue to revisit their story, the rise, the fallout, and the reconciliation that came too late. But for Peter, the story doesn't end with Ace's passing. It continues in the heartbeat of every drum he plays and the rhythm of every memory he carries. "People think death ends things," he said, "but it doesn't. It just changes how you hear the music." In recent interviews, Peter has often spoken about finding peace in solitude. "I used to think I needed the noise," he admitted. "But now I realize silence has its own kind of music." Yet that silence is never truly empty, for somewhere inside it, he still hears Ace's guitar, bright and defiant. Cutting through the years, Peter Criss may no longer wear the Catman makeup, but the man behind the mask has become something greater, a living testament to loyalty, resilience, and friendship that transcended fame. "You can take away the fame, the money, the spotlight," he said, "but you can't take away what we were." As the years pass and the rock legends of his era fade into history, one truth remains unshaken. Peter Criss and Ace Frehley were more than bandmates. They were the soul of a movement, two dreamers who turned chaos into art. And though time may have taken one away, their bond lives on in every note that plays, every fan who remembers, and every heartbeat that still follows their rhythm. When asked what he would say to Ace now if he could, Peter smiled faintly and whispered, "I kept my promise, man. The heartbeat's still alive. And maybe that's the most beautiful ending of all. Not silence, not goodbye, but the quiet, eternal pulse of friendship that refuses to fade."